For many people, COVID offered their first taste of tech and religion. I mean, if you can count sermons by Zoom. But in reality, technology has been creeping into religions for longer than you might think. In 2007, a humanoid robot called Mindar began offering Buddhist wisdom in a 400-year-old temple in Japan. And a robot named Santo is helping Catholics in Poland pray during the pandemic.
It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for someone rich to enter the kingdom of God.
I know, this all might sound a little sci-fi. But it is year 2022. Tech isn't just about robots and algorithms that assemble your car and tell you what groceries you need. Robots aren't just about efficiency and utility anymore. They're about relationships, trust, even emotion. So now the question is, can we build a robot that actually seems alive?
It's been surprising to me how willing and able people are to engage them as social entities. And I think it's happening on both conscious but also subconscious levels.
This is religion's new frontier. If you can believe, trust, or be comforted by a robot, can you worship with it? Or even perhaps worship the technology itself?
Why can't God give a robot a soul? I don't think the limits of your imagination are necessarily the limits of your gods.
On this episode, we'll talk to MIT professor Cynthia Breazeal about social robotics and a friendly little robot named Nexi.
She was probably about 4 feet tall, 2 eyes, eyelids, eyebrows, the whole gamut.
And we'll ask religion professor Robert Geraci what these advances mean for faith today.
Maybe we'll have AI that evokes feelings of awe and can raise people to a more spiritual kind of level.
I'm Dave DeSteno, and this is How God Works. Cynthia Breazeal is one of the world's leading social roboticists. And like me, her interest in robots began in a galaxy far, far away.
I have to say, I'm a Star Wars child.
Me too.
It, in many ways, kind of really crystallized my idea of what an autonomous robot should be. Socially, emotionally intelligent entities who have rich personalities, who are really there to be more allies to us rather than just tools that do what we say. Of course, in Star Wars, they go off and save the galaxy together, so there was a real value add to that as well.
So she started designing robots that, like R2-D2 and C-3PO, appear to have personalities, thoughts, and feelings all their own. In fact, if you walk into her lab at MIT, you kind of feel like you're in a Star Wars movie. You're surrounded by robots of all kinds. There are cute and furry ones that look like teddy bears and dragons that she uses to help children learn. There are humanoid ones with wires hanging out that look like a cross between C-3PO and Terminator. There are car dashboards with little robotic screens that pop up to chat with you. Get ready to see those in your vehicles in a few years. Some of these robots look like they could actually be alive, and others are very clearly a bunch of gears and screens. But Cynthia says that when it comes to people treating them like, a friend, it doesn't actually matter that much if they look human.
They clearly are designed explicitly to look like robots, or maybe they're kind of playful, like kind of a Sesame Street character sort of brought to life in a robotic form, but they're clearly not human. It's been surprising to me how willing and able people are to engage them as social entities. And I think it's happening on both conscious but also subconscious levels.
You might be thinking, not me. I wouldn't respond to a robot like that. I would know it was just a machine. But did you cry when the robot Wall-E looked sad in that Pixar movie? Or did you laugh when the flying carpet in Aladdin wildly gesticulated? Cynthia says it's not so different.
Robots are like mechanical cartoons. In many ways, I say it really does not have to look human at all, but there's qualities of movements that make you want to interpret its behavior as a social entity. The thing that's fascinating to me is even the lowest fidelity mechanical things seem to be enough where people do want to anthropomorphize them.
I remember watching it, the magic carpet in Aladdin, and thinking, it's annoyed, it's happy, it's excited. But, I think about some of the cute robots you've designed to work with kids, and it looks like they're breathing. They have kind of a respiration mode in them, or the gaze and the eyes change. And I think we really want to see intent in things. And the easier you make that with that design, it grasps us.
Once you start dealing with something like speech, it's like game over. It can be just text, and that's enough for people to treat a computer as a social entity. There's an implicit assumption that the more human, the better. And a lot of my work is basically saying, no, not necessarily. It's like, what is the interaction you're trying to achieve? And in a world where we've got plenty of people, why do we need robots to try to pretend they're people? Why not design robots to be what they are, to be great partners and collaborators and to complement us and our human abilities?
It's not about looking more human. It's about acting more human. And that's where cues come in, the nonverbal things that show what we're thinking about and what we intend to do.
We evolved to be social beings, to collaborate, to interact with one another. And so when another entity exhibits these cues, I think our brain at a deep level is like, oh, social entity, not a thing or an object that's governed by the laws of physics, but some kind of being now that is governed by the laws of having a mind, right? Of social interaction, of having goals and intents. Gaze is a profoundly important social cue, right? It's attending to you. It's paying attention to me. Across all species, gaze is extremely salient. So even a raw camera, if it turns just to look at you, people associate that with gaze. Is it a friendly thing, or is it potentially a threat, right?
Okay, I understand if some people might be a little skeptical about this. How could people really think a robot has feelings? That it actually wants to be nice or mean? Well, it's not a futuristic thing. We have the technology right now to do this, to build robots that can make us trust them or make us think they're shifty. And that doesn't mean people are suckers or gullible. Responding this way to a robot is actually what makes us human. Don't believe me? Well, let me tell you about an experiment Cynthia and I did using a robot called Nexi.
Hello, my name is Nixie, and I'm an MDS robot.
So Nexi kind of had very much an anthropomorphic, more human-like face. 2 eyes, eyelids, eyebrows, a jaw that can move in ways that could suggest different kind of jaw, mouth movements to express. She's smaller than a person. So she was probably about, I think, maybe 4 feet tall, kind of from floor to top of the head. So it's about the same height that if you're going to sit in a chair, Nexi could be making eye-to-eye contact with you. It was humanoid, so could gesture, had 2 arms, fingers, the whole gamut. So it was essentially like an upper torso humanoid robot, but it was on a wheeled base.
Okay, I have to admit, Nexi was the coolest robot I had ever seen at the time. I mean, I'm a total sci-fi geek. But that wasn't the only reason I wanted to work with Cynthia. I actually wanted to use this robot to learn something about humans. The goal of the experiment Cynthia and I designed was to see if people would unconsciously react to the robot's nonverbal cues. Things like fidgeting, touching its face, opening its arms in a welcoming gesture, or crossing them in a blocking one, in the same way that we respond to humans.
I can communicate in many of the ways that people do. I can tell you that I'm sad, mad, confused, excited, or even bored, just by moving my face. But I hope you can see that I am very happy to have met you. Thank you for visiting me, and I hope to see you again soon.
Before we ever brought Nexi into the picture, we had filmed many pairs of people talking with each other and then playing a game where they could either cooperate with their partner and make a little money, or cheat their partner and make a lot. To make a long story short, we found that certain cues help people predict their partner's plans to be fair or to cheat. That's when Nexi came in. We wanted to see if people would respond to the same cues if they came from a robot. Of course, this was 15 years ago, and the technology at the time wasn't up to letting Nexi run all on her own. So when people were chatting with her before playing the trust game, Nexi's brain was really being run by 3, wizards. Not the Gandalf type. Think Wizard of Oz.
It's really being puppeted by a human behind the scenes. So in the case of Nexi, we actually had a team of graduate students. One of the graduate students was kind of controlling Nexi's gestures, and the other graduate student was literally having the conversation. So you could feel like you were actually having this kind of chit-chat interaction with this robot.
Yeah, the illusion was amazing. And the thing that was fascinating to me, I don't remember if I ever told you this, but during the conversation where people were kind of doing the get to know you, they started asking Nexi like really interesting questions like, Nexi, what is the meaning of life? Nexi, is there a God? And so it was very fascinating because even at that point, people were willing to ask the robot in a way that they were actually they weren't trying to mess with it. They were actually seeking those kinds of existential questions from it. It was fascinating to me. The first few minutes, people were like, holy cow, I'm talking with a robot. But they really did quickly feel comfortable enough to offer all kinds of self-disclosures. How they spent their summer vacation, what their life goals were. You know, the kind of stuff you tell someone you were comfortable chatting with. But the main point wasn't what Nexi was saying. It's what she was doing. So during the chit-chat, we had Nexi show one of the two sets of cues. A sneaky set or a more neutral one. The sneaky cues were the ones we found people showed when they were going to cheat you. They'd fidget with their hands, repeatedly touch their faces, and cross their arms to kind of signal a social distance or block. The neutral ones were more innocuous, like raising an arm or tilting the head. And then it was time to put some money on the line. We had people play a game where they had to decide if they thought Nexi was going to cheat and try and take money from them. What we found was nothing short of startling. People who saw Nexi give the untrustworthy cues reported believing that the robot was going to cheat them in the game. And so, they tried to cheat her back when it was their turn. Those who saw the other cues thought Nexi was great and that they could count on her. They had no idea why. They just said they had a gut feeling. The real reason, though, was that we had cracked the mind's unconscious code for reading whether someone cares about you or not. And best of all, we showed we could use it perfectly in a robot.
I learned so much from that project. And one of the things that really fascinated me was we used Nexi as a scientific instrument, right? So it was acknowledging that it's literally impossible to ask a human to control their nonverbal cues with such precision. But with the robot, you can very precisely control these cues.
And that's great, right? You can make sure that if you're designing a robotic partner, it can make people feel comfortable. Like they can rely on it, tell it anything, trust it. Well, maybe. But it depends on if that trust is well placed. Or put another way, it depends on who designed that robot and for what purpose. Here's where tech's role in religion comes into question. If we can make a robot people will trust, will believe, that raises a host of questions when we're talking about things like morality, sin, and existential concerns.
I think when you're talking about something that's so deeply human, like spirituality, I think you really do have to think about what's the appropriate role of a technology in that scenario.
Just because we can make a technology seem more trustworthy, more wise, more caring, does that mean we should? For thousands of years, people have looked to priests, rabbis, and imams for spiritual guidance. Is it okay for robots or other tech to fill those roles? Or put another way, can tech have a spark of the spiritual in it?
I think people finding ways to see magic and enchantment and wonder in the world is a good thing.
That's Robert Geraci, a professor of religion at Manhattan College, who has spent a good deal of his career exploring how technology and religion interact. And one thing he likes to point out is that the question of religion using technology is nothing new.
There's a long history, for example, in Christianity, of believing technology was kind of God's way of making the world better. That goes back at least to it's very clear in Francis Bacon.
Bacon was a 17th century philosopher and devout Christian who, as Robert says, believed God gave us the smarts to develop technology as a gift to improve the world.
And you even have people in early 20th century Russia arguing that the resurrection promised by Jesus was a resurrection that human beings were actively supposed to create through technology. So there are people within religious communities who have had that kind of commitment to technology.
So when it comes to religion, Robert, like Cynthia, thinks the main question for tech isn't if it will be used, but why it should be used, either in current religions or to develop entirely new ones.
So what is our motivation for building these kinds of new religions really matters to me, because religion engages contemporary technology. You can imagine how new architectural and engineering techniques produce new kinds of church experiences for medieval Europeans, right? So there's kind of nothing new about thinking about how does this technology change the way I'm going to do religion, and seeing divine activity through AI or robotics seems like that could be reasonable to me.
That's true. I never thought about that. But when you walk into medieval churches and you have those beautiful high arches, they evoke this feeling of awe in you. And as a psychologist who studies emotion, we know how those feelings of awe affect people and can actually lead to spiritual experiences. So you're right. That in and of itself was a technology to kind of ping parts of our minds.
Yeah. And maybe we'll have AI that evokes similar feelings of awe and can raise people to a more spiritual kind of level.
Robots that talk to us are one thing, but an artificial intelligence that could truly think would be another. You could ask it anything, and it would know. It would seem wise, all knowledgeable, perhaps even godlike. Worthy of following? Or maybe even worshipping? This might seem a bit strange at first, an idea that only a modern tech guru might come up with. But believe it or not, the idea has a basis in some traditional faiths. You might be familiar with the idea of an avatar from that James Cameron flick, where it referred to a remote-controlled, genetically engineered body sent to talk to the people of Pandora. Many religions have the idea of avatars too, physical forms that gods use when coming to Earth to talk to us. In Hinduism or Buddhism, they're pretty common. So at a time like ours, where AIs are about to become sentient or self-aware, could a god inhabit a computer or manifest in the internet?
Yeah, there's so much there. I've already seen in some of my research in India, people referring to the 10th avatar of Vishnu, Kalki, coming as an AI. So for those who don't know much about Hinduism, Vishnu is a preserver god, and he has shown up on Earth so far in 9 different forms, and he's supposed to come a 10th time as this god Kalki to end the world and begin the new world, to restore the world to its original state of grace, right? Because that's a cyclical process in Hinduism. Once I was given a talk at a design institute, and I had a student who said to me, "What is God today? But it could be AI. Couldn't Kalki come as AI? Wouldn't that make sense?" And I've had other interview conversationalists who have said, hey, there are lots of people who think that maybe Kalki will come as AI. Because if AI gets really, really, really powerful and has lots of knowledge and ability to make things manifest in the world, then it kind of makes sense that the god would come that way. I haven't heard anyone, personally, I've never had anyone suggest to me that the return of Jesus might come in a robotic form, but I honestly don't suppose it'll be too much longer before someone does. In Buddhism, you have this all-pervading presence of Buddha, and sometimes that involves integrating technological objects like funeral practices for dolls or printing blocks. 40 years ago, the roboticist in Japan, Masahiro Mori, he suggested that a robot could become a Buddha. It's like a one-line, almost a throwaway in his book. Just this one, robots have Buddha nature because everything has Buddha nature, so someday a robot could be a Buddha. And in 40 years, nobody has come out to say, absolutely not, that's unreasonable.
Having Buddha nature is kind of what it sounds like. It means having the seed of Buddha's wisdom within you, a seed that can grow with learning and practice, and that when fully matured, will clear all illusions from your mind and lead to enlightenment. That's kind of the idea behind Mindar, the Buddhist robot in Japan. It's a robotic torso covered in silicone meant to look and move like a real person. And unlike Nexi, the wisdom it offers comes from its Buddhist-influenced algorithms. It can live forever, and so it can keep becoming wiser. But what do most people really think about this? Do they think it's great or creepy?
I want to start with biotechnology. If you go back to the 1970s when in vitro fertilization was being created, Leon Kass, the bioethicist, said this was a terrible idea. It was going to do all these terrible things. And he knew it was a terrible idea because when you told people we're going to fertilize eggs functionally in a test tube, which isn't really how it's done, but that we were going to do it that way, people are go, oh, that's gross and unnatural. And so he coined this phrase, wisdom of repugnance, and the common term was the yuck factor, and he said anything we feel yucky about, we just shouldn't do. Now, the reality is in vitro fertilization is now a technology that's enormously comfortable to people, including Leon Kass. And so we get really used to things. So I've been asking my students about this for many, many years now, for the decades I've been teaching, and I started asking them when I first taught a religion and science class. Let's say you have a domestic robot that helps wash and keep things working around your house, and it can talk with you, it converses with you, and one day it says, "May I come to church with you?" Will you let it come to church with you? And 20 years ago, I would get maybe 1 out of 25 students, 2 out of 25 students kind of hesitantly going, maybe, and all the others were kind of uniformly no. And when I ask them now, and it hasn't been that long, but when I ask them now, as I continue to every single year, now about half of a class will just say, sure, why not? And so there's been a massive change, at least among young people attending a small Catholic liberal arts college in the Bronx, right? So, I mean, that's my sample set for that particular question is my students at Manhattan College. But I've seen really, really significant changes. And I think what has happened is that people are used to their technologies in a way they weren't.
It's true. Sometimes now we light candles in church by pushing a button that turns on an LED flame. We have robotic pets. There are even smart refrigerators that know when we're running low on groceries and automatically add them to an Instacart account to remind us to go to the store.
It's going to be all those little baby steps, right? I mean, already people name robot vacuum cleaners.
That's right.
And it was well known when the Roomba vacuum cleaner was kind of first made that people were mailing them back broken and saying, don't send me a new one. You have to fix this one. Like, this one's a part of my family. You have to fix it.
It's not clear if Roomba honored those requests, or if, like some desperate parents who dropped a new goldfish in the fish tank to replace a belly-up one before their kids got home, they just hoped no one would notice a swap. But either way, people wanted their robot. After all, it usually had a name.
People will name objects, they form relationships with objects, even objects that are terribly hard to form relationships to, like a Frisbee-shaped robot vacuum. So by the time it gets much more able to engage with us, then it will be a natural progression for people to start seeing it. And I think when I think of my students 20 years ago saying, absolutely not, a robot can't come to church with me, they didn't have interactions with computers that were sufficiently sophisticated that they could see that as a plausible kind of question. Whereas now my students are talking to their phones. They might have something like an Alexa spying on them at home. They've got technologies that they're talking to and that sometimes talk back to them. And so they have a whole lot more comfort and familiarity with that conceptually. And one little bit at a time, right?
But what if robots get too good? From an engineering and design perspective, Cynthia says it is possible for AI to actually be smarter than humans. But what does that mean for religion? And really for all of humanity?
I think this is kind of this provocative story about AI right now. Let's call it narrow AI, right? So once you kind of understand what the thing is to optimize, you can run these algorithms to do that potentially in a way that's far exceeds what human capacity is and to outperform people, right?
I'm wondering what you think about that, because in the right hands, those can be amazing tools, right? I know you design robots to keep kids comfortable in the hospital and make them feel at ease. But you can build this sense of trust and empathy and camaraderie with the robot by doing these things. But if you're a marketer or you have some other intent of trying to convince people of something, doesn't that also give you tremendous power?
Here I am at the Media Lab building these robots that through social interaction, as you're saying, yes, I mean, you're talking about helping someone learn or helping someone adhere to a diet and exercise program or to be more emotionally resilient. I mean, these are AI systems that are shaping our thoughts, our beliefs, our behaviors. I mean, all of these things. You know, we're doing it to try to empower people to make better decisions for themselves. But there's another whole other side to that coin, right? Where it could be used to manipulate. Systems are capable of persuading you in potentially really profound ways. And you have to ask the question, so who's persuading me for what reason? And of course, as human beings, we try to persuade each other all the time. It's just part of social interaction. But now you're talking about an entity where there's layers of that. Who do you trust?
That's a good question. When it comes to asking Siri or Alexa what's on your shopping list or what the weather's going to be tomorrow, the stakes aren't that high. But when it comes to religion, questions about morality, about meaning, the stakes can get pretty big pretty fast. The thought of a robot becoming a charismatic leader like a politician or a pope is kind of chilling.
I think at this present stage here in the early 21st century, there are lots of people watching these technologies develop and feeling fear, right? But we human beings, part of the existential state of humanity is the terror of history, right? Like we're always scared of the things we did in the past and the things we might do in the future. Those warnings we get from pop culture that say we're going the wrong way, our technologies are going to overmaster us and destroy us, that's really a fear about us. That's not really a fear about our machines. That's the recognition that we're not always doing right in the world and that our obligation is to do right.
That's a critical point. Yes, someday soon AIs might have an almost godlike intelligence, and given the number of cameras we have around, a godlike omnipotence. But it's we who are creating those AIs. It's we who, in a sense, are their gods, at least right now. And so, if we want our creations to be good, to be virtuous, we have to teach them how. We have to imbue them with a moral sense. If we don't, if we rely on letting them learn just by conversing with people on the web, they're going to end up like Microsoft's infamous AI chatbot Tay, who within days turned into a misogynistic racist. And so, in a sense, robots need religion or rules of ethics as much as the rest of us, which is why we scientists and designers and academics are all putting our heads together.
There's room for philosophical ethics. There's room for biological ethicists, for religious ethicists to come together and talk about what ought we be doing around us and how do we fix the problems. And then if the folks in the industry say, yeah, we want to draw on that, we want to build machines that are actually actively helping, then I think we'll get there.
But as with any religion, you have to be careful.
We have to be clear and honest that religions are not always good for people. Sometimes people do terrible things in the name of their religions or even provoked by their religions. But people also do beautiful, wonderful, amazing things in the name of their religions and provoked by their religions. And so an honest appraisal might say, okay, if I'm looking at, say, in Hinduism, the dharma, or which is usually translated as duty. If I'm looking at duty in Hinduism and thinking, what does that mean for human to human and human to machine relationships, and how do I want to design AI? I don't want to take Dharma and go, okay, that means that some people are born with particular duties that they're stuck with forever. That's a terrible use of it, right? But I do want to think about what are our sense of mutual obligation. So what are my duties that I owe to others, my duties to the environment? And we draw on our religious traditions and practices to do that. That would be a wonderful thing. And so I do think there's a lot of space for conversation in the AI ethics field, that it's not just about philosophical positions on ethics. And of course, there's a place for that too, but also religious ethics and religious actions. What is a good Christian, a good Jew, a good Hindu? What do they ought to be doing in the world? And once we look at what they ought to be doing in the world, we're going to start looking at kind of overlaps that produce probably a good ethos for what we want our machines to do in the world also.
So in some ways, it's not just us learning to worship an AI or a robot. It is spiritually developing that AI itself, giving it that spiritual, in some sense, in terms of principles, grounding, so that it is, as it grows and develops, it's going to have the right kind of telos or purpose of what it should do.
Yeah, no matter how complex it ever gets, right? Whether it gets to human equivalence or greater, if we're building that in, if we're leveraging those religious values to benefit the most marginalized, to create a better world around us, if we can do that, we will have served the future well, regardless of how good the robots get.
So, Robert, as you think about maybe 20 years, 30 years down the line from where we are now, and I know it's all speculation and we're not sure how it's going to come out, but what ways do you see maybe technology, AI, or robotics influencing the average person's worship?
So my hope is that people would find that the technology, that you get these initial hype waves, right? And everybody jumps on the technology, and then they come to kind of realize, maybe I don't want to be on Facebook all the time or whatever. And so that we get these up and down kind of waves of use, and it may be that there are better and worse times for people to engage in something like a robot at home that could get quite interactive. I mean, you could imagine it getting quite sociable in that fashion, but you could also imagine it suggesting you go to church with other people once in a while. And that might be a good kind of programming element in all of this. Might be, if it's coming from a spirit of genuine religiosity, maybe the robots, the apps, whatever, could say, hey, you're doing great.
At heart, much of religion is about connection, a caring connection with the divine, but also with our fellow humans. And it's here that AI-driven robots could be a big help. They can be a spiritual companion or even guide for people who can't go to church or temple because of being homebound, or in areas where there's a shortage of clergy. Or, like an advanced mindar, they can offer inspiration to whole communities of worshipers that come together to see them. In some ways, they might even prove to be superior preachers, less vulnerable to motives for power or bias than human religious leaders can be. In the best world, they'll help us grow, spiritually and otherwise, if, and here's the big if, we design them to be good partners.
To me, that's really the question of, it's the partnership. That's what I care about. And how do you need to design these entities that are engaging and natural for people to interact with so that they can empower us and complement us? What do we as people need that's going to help us be who we aspire to be, to live in a society we want to live in?
Next time on How God Works, more and more people seem to be making work their new religion, at least in terms of time and devotion. But that can be a big problem, as most corporations don't care about or even know how to respond to people's deeper needs.
Workplaces are noticing their employees showing up with these longings that are going unmet. People who are craving things like belonging and personal growth and connection to something bigger. A lot of the time, those constituents don't have other environments in which that's available to them.
So maybe organizations could benefit from adopting a spiritual perspective.
The calling for us as organizational, institutional beings is to not check our spirituality at the door. The best organizations have a mission in the world in which they are called to help human beings thrive.
How God Works is hosted and written by me, Dave DeSteno. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman of Future Projects. Associate producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Our executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. Music and post-production mix and master by Merritt Jacob. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was also made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. And if you want to see Nexi in action, or any of the other robots we've mentioned on this episode, we put links in the show notes. You can also find a clip of Nexi on the podcast page of my website. Follow me on Twitter @David DeSteno. That's DavidDesteno.